There was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham from far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Beside all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
For those of us who have not read this story in the book, we may have seen several videos or movies that relate this story to us. And yet, we still have the same characters, and we still have the same take on this Charles Dickens classic story. So Ebenezer Scrooge's least favorite time of the year was definitely Christmas. He glares at carolers and scolds his employee, Bob Cratchit, before turning down his nephew's invitation to Christmas dinner. Arriving home, Scrooge is startled to find the ghostly face of Jacob Marley staring at him in the front door knocker. It disappears. And as he lay in bed and begins to question his senses once again, Scrooge looks around the room and notices the Dutch tiles ornamenting the fireplace with images of biblical stories. Dickens doesn't say how long Scrooge has been ignorant of these powerful images, but it's safe to say that they hadn't had much influence on Scrooge's demeanor. It's like being in a beautiful sanctuary surrounded by stained glass windows detailing Jesus' life, and then not welcoming the poor and outcast to sit beside you. I wonder how often God is standing right beside us and we are unaware of it. I wonder how often God is standing right beside us and we are unaware of it. The book of Hebrews, chapter 13, says, "Keep loving each other like family. Don't neglect to open up your homes to guests, because by doing this, some have been hosts to angels without even knowing it. Your way of life should be free from the love of money, and you should be content with what you have. After all, he has said, 'I will never leave you or abandon you.'" stops. It never ends. It's just that we don't see it as often as we should. Have you ever looked back on your life and you've realized that there's something that you have gone through and that there is no way that you could have gone through it without God being present, and you say, whoa, God was there the whole time. And yet, while sometimes we go through these things in our lives, we don't recognize God's grace in the midst of it. Because we get so focused and enveloped on what's happening to me, or what's happening to my loved one, that we don't recognize that God is standing right beside us. That God never leaves us or abandons us. That God is constantly pouring out this grace that is a free gift. God was there the whole time. God is here with us. Now, after seeing Marley's face, Scrooge becomes way more aware of his surroundings. It was like a wake-up call. What events in life have made you more aware of your surroundings? Maybe it was that fender bender that made you aware of your blind spots. Maybe it was you or a loved one who suffered from a terrible disease that made you more aware of other people's sufferings. One thing that has made me more aware of my surroundings was when my father suffered a massive stroke a couple of years ago. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I had never known how to have a conversation with someone who had suffered a stroke. And I've realized that those who have just want to have a conversation like any other person does. It has made me aware that because things happen to others, it doesn't make them different. How have we been careless to notice God's presence that never lets us go and is always near? Have we been careless to not recognize God's presence in our lives? This presence that never lets us go and is always near. And so Scrooge becomes more aware of his surroundings. And after he moves through his home and he goes into his bedroom, which was once Marley's house, and he goes into his bedroom and he is sitting there and he's noticing all these Dutch tiles with biblical stories and characters around him. He drifts off to sleep, and Scrooge is suddenly awakened, right, by his servant's bells over the door and is met by Marley's ghost. Charles Dickens says he is in chains, weighted and forged from his miserly wealth. Ooh. Sounds heavy. Part of Marley's punishment also, he says, is that he is never at peace and is always restless. Sound familiar? It does to me. It sounds very familiar. There are, I think, at this time of year, just this countless number of parties, of decorations, concerts, gifts to wrap, stockings to hang or take down, depending on how good or bad you were, right? And there's a lot of meals to prepare. There's a constant go, 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 go attitude. There's this Christmas song that sometimes I chuckle at that says, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." And I like to say it's the busiest time of the year because it seems like I never have time to stop. It's go, 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 go. On the other hand, there is also loneliness as well. Memories of loved ones who are no longer with us. The numbing silence of an empty house. The sadness of seeing giggling children you could never have yourself. But Advent is to be a time of waiting. Not only for the divine and creation to collide, but it is a discipline of slowing down to notice God's presence in a still, small voice within a violent and hurried world. When's the last time you slowed down? I like to tell a personal story of how I was once like Ebenezer or Scrooge. There was a time in my life, I don't know exactly when it started, but it started somewhere in my teenage years, those wonderful rebellious times. And I decided that I didn't like Christmas and wanted nothing to do with it. I even had a t-shirt that I think I wore out that said, "Bah, Humbug." And I'd wear it everywhere and all the time. And I thought I was cute. I didn't buy into the consumerism of the Christmas season. I didn't buy into the hustle and bustle and everyone going everywhere and it's just such a jolly good time. I didn't buy into that. Maybe it was because I was in a state of depression or whatever it might have been, but I didn't buy into any of it. I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't want a tree. I didn't want lights. I didn't want presents. I didn't want anything to do with Christmas. I was Scrooge, and I was happy to admit it. Something happened to me, and then by something I mean Jesus. One year on a Christmas Eve where I recognized that it doesn't matter that the rest of the world buys into all of this stuff, but I can have joy, and I can have peace, and I can have love, and I can have hope in this Christmas season because Jesus came for me. It didn't matter what anybody else was doing to celebrate the season. It became personal. And so I went from this guy who wanted nothing to do with Christmas and bah humbug was fine with me to a guy who was Merry Christmas. And I want lights, and I want trees, and I want my yard and my house to be the godliest looking Christmas thing that ever exploded. Because I want to celebrate Jesus. I want to celebrate a Savior. I want to celebrate the divine colliding with creation. That is amazing. To think about Christ stepping out of heaven to live and dwell amongst us is worth celebrating. In our gospel story today, we see that in the life of the rich man that he could not see the poor man's value as a child of God. The poor man was neither welcome at his table nor with his time. In the afterlife, the rich man still sees Lazarus as a servant whose job it is to do the rich man's bidding. The story is not about the afterlife or reaping what you sow or economics. It is, however, I believe, a story that will convict us to open our eyes to the value of each and every The great void between Lazarus and the rich man was not wealth or status. Rather, the great chasm across which the rich man cannot travel is ignorance, not knowing the other. When we fail to see that class is a human construct built around the false belief that some souls are worth more than other souls, the chasm that separates us from one another is indeed impossible to cross. Some souls are not worth more than others. In a way, Marley is like the rich man in this passage, in that you reap what you sow. But instead, the difference here is he came to warn Scrooge that he has been sowing the wrong kind of seeds. He's been sowing the wrong kind of seed. And so Scrooge cannot fathom that Marley walks restlessly, and he says to Marley, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." To which Marley responds like this. Now listen. Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Let us not forget that the business of Christianity is loving humankind. Marley is trying to warn Scrooge that if he worries only about business and forgets about human beings, then he may end up in chains that are forged from his miserly wealth. Now let us also not be confused that we need to understand that we cannot do anything to earn God's grace. As I stated earlier, it is a free gift offered to us throughout our whole lives. When we learn to accept and share that free gift of grace, we begin to understand that Christ is living with us. That we are here on earth to serve God and to share that grace with one another. And that the only chasms that exist are the ones that we create. The only chasms that exist are the ones that we create. The only chasms that exist that separate us, that divide us as people, are the ones that we create. They're too young. They're too old. They have tattoos. I don't. They have green hair. I don't. They like hip-hop. I like country. They like country. I like hip-hop. We're covered in tattoos. I'm not. Well, I am. You see, friends, this is what divides us. Is instead of saying Merry Christmas, everyone, we say Merry Christmas to those I know. It becomes us and them instead of everyone. It's as if sometimes we might even say, without saying the words, "Bah humbug," to those who are not like me. But Merry Christmas to those who are. This next question I want to have you think about I almost didn't want to ask because I have to answer it myself. If Marley's ghost were to visit you tonight, what do you think he might say? You see, for Scrooge, it was his wealth that separated him from his fellow neighbors. Now I have not amassed a great amount of wealth in my life, but there are things that still separate me. My own stuff that causes me to push. That's hard to look at. What do you think he might say if he visited you tonight? Another thing I would like us to think about this week is during this Advent season, this holiday season, how might we practice the spiritual discipline of slowing down in order to notice God's presence? Along with, if your calendar looks anything like mine, have you found time to rest? Have you scheduled time to slow down and notice and listen? Don't let the busyness of this season be your business. And the last thing I'd like for us to think about is this. I know I'm asking you to think about a lot this week. How do you feel called to respond to God's grace? How do you feel called to respond to God's grace? Maybe it's offering peace to one another. Maybe it's offering peace to someone you know in your life that could use some peace. How do you do that? I don't know. Depends on the person. Maybe a covered dish would be a good way to offer peace. Maybe a nice warm hug would be a good way to offer peace. Maybe a phone call or a note. Maybe just a listening ear. Maybe you're the person who is needing some peace this Christmas. How we respond to God's grace, trying to find that peace. So this week we're asking a lot. What are the things in your life you say, bah humbug to?